Born with liquid bones and a skull full of water, this king's body betrayed him, shattering an empire forever. Look closely at any royal portrait, and you'll see perfection. Symmetry carved into every line of their face, a jaw set with authority, eyes that seem to peer directly into your soul. The aura tells you they are untouchable, chosen by divine providence to rule kingdoms, empires, entire continents. Gold, velvet, jewels, the trappings of power draped over bodies meant to inspire awe. Yet what you see is an illusion. Behind the painted mask of perfection lies a story of profound horror, a tale that shatters every notion of royal invincibility. The king you are about to meet was not born whole, not born strong. He arrived into this world with bones so fragile they could barely hold him upright, a skull that held more water than brain. From the first breath, the fragility of his existence was evident, a cruel mockery of the grandeur around him. His mother recoiled, instinctively horrified, unable to nurse the child she had brought into the world. Doctors stared in disbelief, their finest knowledge failing against a body that refused to obey nature. Yet, even as he struggled to breathe, even as his bones bent and bowed under their own weakness, he was heir to a vast empire. Everything he touched, everything he was meant to embody, was a promise that would remain unfulfilled. This is not a story of rebellion, not of battles or political intrigue. It is the story of biology turning against itself, a vivid warning of what happens when genetics are pushed past the point of survival. Welcome to the life of a king cursed by his own body, the tragic spectacle of human fragility in the most extreme royal form. This king was born into a world of opulence and unrelenting expectation. The palace walls were lined with gold leaf, portraits of ancestors gazing down with stony authority, and tapestries depicting conquests that spanned continents. Every day, courtiers whispered the same mantra: perfection, purity, legacy. The king's family believed that their bloodline was sacred, a divine thread stretching back through centuries of rulers who had wielded power with unquestioned authority. Yet what seemed like divine blessing was slowly poisoning the very body of the young prince. Generations of intermarriage, cousins wed to cousins, uncles to nieces, created a genetic time bomb. Each marriage intended to preserve purity instead strengthened the grip of inherited defects, a slow, invisible chain tightening around the next heir. This child, who should have been the pinnacle of royal vigor, entered the world already burdened by centuries of repeated mistakes. His bones were weak, his skull swollen with fluid, a body unable to support itself, a fragile vessel for an empire that demanded strength. While palace advisors discussed trade, treaties, and war, the real battle was inside the infant's body. Every breath was a struggle, every movement a test of endurance. The opulence surrounding him, silk sheets, ornate cradles, gold-laced clothing, could not mask the fragility of his existence. The courtiers and physicians were captivated and horrified, a constant reminder that appearances could not deceive nature. In a single fragile figure, the grandeur of centuries and the failures of hereditary ambition collided. And yet, the empire's machinery expected him to perform, to rule, to continue a lineage that had once seemed untouchable. The walls of the palace, heavy with history, could not protect him from the biological destiny written in his genes. From the very first moment, it was clear that this king would live in a world of contrast. Power surrounding a body utterly incapable of sustaining it. His story is a cautionary tale, the result of human ambition clashing violently with the limits of nature. It was a cold, grey morning in the royal palace when the cries, or lack thereof, of the newborn echoed through the dim chamber. Midwives and physicians leaned close, their faces pale with apprehension as the infant was delivered into a world that seemed ill-prepared for him. The baby's head was grotesquely swollen, the bones soft and pliable, as if they might collapse under their own weight. His limbs trembled like fragile twigs, bending unnaturally when touched, and his tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Queen Mariana, his mother, gasped, recoiling instinctively. This was no act of cruelty, it was a natural, primal reaction to the deformity staring back at her. Her son, the heir to a sprawling empire, was physically compromised in ways that defied understanding. The palace physicians, though seasoned and learned, were at a loss. They whispered urgently, consulted grim tomes, and shook their heads at the impossibility before them. The infant's mouth was malformed, unable to close fully, his tongue large and obstructive, already hinting at a lifetime of struggle with basic functions like feeding. Servants fidgeted nervously, unsure how to care for a child so frail, while the courtiers, accustomed to grandeur and pageantry, stifled horrified murmurs. Outside, the vast empire continued in its routines, oblivious to the biological catastrophe that had entered the royal bloodline. The midwives attempted to feed him, but the infant lacked the strength even to suckle, barely reacting to gentle prodding. Every movement seemed to require monumental effort, every breath a battle. Yet even in this moment of immediate horror, one truth was undeniable. This child was the future king. Power, wealth, and influence were all his by right. But nature had already refused to comply. The very first hours of his life foreshadowed decades of struggle, pain, and humiliation. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear that the greatest challenge he would face would not be war, politics, or betrayal. It would be the war within his own body. The first years of the king's life were a slow, grueling battle against his own body. Every day presented new challenges that other children would never even imagine. He struggled to feed, weak and exhausted, his malformed mouth making even the simplest meals nearly impossible. Wet nurses whispered of his lethargy, noting how he rarely cried, not from contentment, but from an almost total lack of energy. His oversized, fluid-filled skull tilted unnaturally, and his limbs bent under even the slightest weight, requiring attendants to carry him wherever he needed to go. Court physicians documented every anomaly with growing alarm, yet even their combined knowledge could not provide a solution. Simple infections became life-threatening. Measles, chickenpox, and other childhood illnesses swept through the palace with devastating effects, each one leaving scars that added to the catalogue of deformities he carried. Social interactions, which should have been a part of early childhood, were limited by his fragility. Courtiers avoided close contact, fearful of harming him or being shocked by his appearance. Tutors attempted to educate him, but his physical weakness made prolonged attention impossible. Even sitting upright for lessons was exhausting, his small frame unable to support his head or body. Play, laughter, and exploration, the simple joys of youth, were denied. Every movement was monitored, every activity measured against the constant fear of collapse or injury. And yet, the palace demanded appearances. He was the heir, the future of an empire, the symbol of continuity. His every struggle, invisible to the outside world, unfolded behind heavy palace doors. By the age of 4, he could barely walk, and when he did, it was with assistance. His first words, if spoken at all, were incomprehensible, hindered by a jaw that would never fully form. These early years set the stage for a lifetime of suffering, as the fragile body of a king became the most tragic spectacle in European history. As the king grew, his body refused to grow with him. The fragility that marked his infancy only worsened, each year revealing new, devastating complications. By age 6, his legs were bowed and weak, too fragile to support him without constant assistance. Walking required attendants, specially designed chairs, and endless patience from those around him. Diseases that most children survived easily became life-threatening battles for him. Measles, chickenpox, and smallpox left scars, weakened muscles, and swollen, painful joints. His oversized skull, filled with fluid, pressed relentlessly on his brain, causing headaches so severe that even sitting upright was agony. Tutors tried to teach him, but lessons often had to be repeated dozens of times, his mind slowed by the pressure on his developing brain and the constant physical exhaustion. Socially, he remained isolated. Courtiers whispered behind silk curtains, unsure whether to pity or fear the fragile young king. Meals were a daily trial. He could not chew properly, and his jaw made swallowing a painful ordeal. Every bite required immense effort, and yet nutrition was vital for a body already under siege. The king's daily existence became a regimen of survival: careful feeding, gentle movement, and constant vigilance against illness or injury. Play, exploration, and childhood freedom were non-existent. Even his presence at court was a spectacle of fragility. As ambassadors and visitors observed the boy who was heir to an empire yet could barely perform the simplest tasks of living, his life was a slow, unrelenting exercise in endurance, a constant reminder that the glory of royal blood could not overcome the horrors embedded in his own genetics. Each day, he lived at the mercy of a body that betrayed him in every conceivable way. When puberty arrived, it brought little relief or hope. Unlike other boys of his age, he showed almost no signs of growth or development. His body remained stunted, bones brittle and fragile, muscles weak and unformed. While peers grew taller, developed strength, and began the journey into manhood, he remained painfully small, a child trapped in an adult world. His jaw, already severely malformed, continued to protrude, making even speech a challenge. His voice remained thin and high, lacking the resonance of a young king meant to command armies and courts. Body hair was sparse, his limbs weak, and his skeletal deformities worsened under the strain of daily life. Court physicians observed in hushed conferences, noting with grim faces that his body seemed frozen in a perpetual state of immaturity. Social interactions became increasingly awkward. Peers and courtiers alike recoiled, unsure how to respond to a young man who looked more like a fragile boy. Royal duties, once ceremonial and manageable, now became a trial of endurance. Each step through the palace halls was precarious, each gesture a delicate balance between dignity and collapse. The psychological toll was equally severe. The king began to understand, even at a young age, that he could never meet the expectations placed upon him. He was heir to a vast empire, yet his body would never allow him to rule as a proper man. The contrast between appearance and reality created whispers of curses, divine punishment, and supernatural afflictions. Yet the truth was far more horrifying. His limitations were written into his very DNA, the inevitable result of generations of inbreeding and genetic collapse. Puberty, meant to transform boys into men, instead revealed a lifetime of suffering awaiting the fragile heir. By the time he reached adulthood, the pressures of royalty weighed heavier than ever. He was no longer just a fragile figure in the palace. He was expected to secure the empire's future. His primary duty, produce an heir to continue the lineage. Yet his body, betrayed by centuries of inbreeding, refused to cooperate. Marriages were arranged with young, healthy princesses from powerful families, hoping to overcome what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. The contrast between husband and bride was stark. Radiant youth, perfect health and promise on one side, frail, malformed, and painfully weak on the other. The wedding night, meant to symbolize union and the beginning of the next generation, quickly became a display of tragedy. No amount of instruction or encouragement could help. His body was incapable of performing even the most basic tasks of manhood. Courtiers whispered in fear and frustration, physicians concocted countless remedies, and mystics were summoned to attempt miracles. Concoctions of herbs, animal organs, and even exotic potions were administered, none effective. His mother, desperate for a grandchild, consulted priests, mystics, and holy relics, sometimes resorting to the macabre, placing him near corpses in hopes of invoking a supernatural cure. Time passed, years of failed attempts stacking upon each other, humiliating the king and straining the court. The empire watched as the heir, who should have embodied power and continuity, remained incapable of fulfilling his most basic duty. Each failed attempt emphasized the cruel truth. The problem was not lack of effort or will, but the genetic collapse written into his very cells. Power and expectation surrounded him, yet biology rendered him helpless, a living testament to the devastating consequences of extreme inbreeding and the fragility of royal lineage. The heir to an empire had become its greatest tragedy. As the years progressed, his body deteriorated further, each day bringing new struggles that compounded the previous ones. His once fragile bones became even more brittle, his limbs bowing under the weight of time and repeated illness. Walking, which had always required assistance, became a careful, precarious ordeal. Seizures began to appear, sudden and terrifying, leaving him collapsed on the cold marble floors of the palace. Foam at his lips, attendants rushing to steady him. His jaw, already grotesquely protruding, worsened with age, making eating, speaking, and even breathing difficult. Saliva constantly dribbled, and each attempt to speak produced incomprehensible sounds, requiring interpreters even among those who knew him intimately. Illnesses continued to strike with cruel persistence. Smallpox, influenza, and fevers left him scarred and weakened. A body that had never known normal strength now further ravaged. His mental faculties, once intact, began showing signs of strain, moments of confusion, lapses in memory, and episodes where he conversed with unseen figures. Courtiers whispered of curses and demons, interpreting his suffering as a divine punishment rather than a biological reality. Social isolation became the norm. Few dared approach him closely, both out of fear and sorrow. Yet the empire still expected leadership, a burden he could no longer bear. Royal decrees were issued with assistance, every gesture of authority mediated by ministers and advisors. Even his personal comfort became a struggle. Special furniture, supports, and attendants were required for every movement, every basic activity of life. The king, once a symbol of divine lineage, had become a figure defined entirely by fragility, illness, and the relentless betrayal of his own body. Each year brought reminders that power, without the strength to wield it, is an empty crown. The inevitable came when he reached his late 30s, though his body had already lived decades of suffering in the form of constant pain and debilitation. On the day of his death, attendants found him gasping, unable to lift himself from his bed, skin pallid and stretched over a skeleton that seemed too fragile to support life. His jaw jutted outward, lips perpetually parted, saliva pooling on his chest. Breath came in shallow, rasping bursts, a cruel echo of the struggles that had defined his entire existence. When death finally claimed him, the empire mourned. But the full horror was only revealed during the autopsy. Royal physicians, trained in anatomy but unprepared for this magnitude of deformity, approached the body with trepidation. They discovered bones so fragile they could be crushed by simple pressure, the skeleton warped and bent unnaturally. His skull, swollen with fluid, had left minimal room for actual brain tissue, explaining the mental and physical limitations that had tormented him his entire life. Internal organs were in shocking states of deterioration, the heart shriveled, lungs scarred and corroded, intestines gangrenous, each system compromised beyond expectation. Even his reproductive organs revealed the cruel truth behind his inability to father heirs. In every respect, the autopsy confirmed what observers had feared for decades. This king had been a living miracle, surviving far longer than his body should have allowed, a fragile vessel sustained only by careful attention and human endurance. Modern science later identified genetic factors, combined skeletal dysplasia, hydrocephalus, and pituitary deficiencies that had interacted catastrophically. Yet in that moment, surrounded by stunned physicians and silent courtiers, it was a scene of pure, visceral horror, the physical record of a life lived in defiance of biology, a testament to the tragic consequences of centuries of inbreeding. Centuries later, modern science has unraveled the horrifying truth behind the fragile king's condition. Geneticists analyzing his remains discovered a perfect storm of inherited disorders, a consequence of relentless inbreeding over generations. His bones, fragile and malformed, were the result of skeletal dysplasia, a condition that prevented proper growth and left him unable to support his own body. The fluid in his skull, known today as hydrocephalus, had compressed the brain, explaining both his cognitive limitations and the severe headaches that plagued him throughout life. Pituitary deficiencies meant his body could not produce the hormones necessary for normal development. Muscle weakness, stunted stature, and lack of sexual maturity were all direct results. Some researchers even speculate he may have suffered from distal renal tubular acidosis, further weakening his bones and straining vital organs. Each condition alone would have been debilitating. Together they created a body entirely unfit for the demands of kingship. Yet the tragedy was not merely medical, it was systemic. Every step, every breath, every failure to grow was written into his DNA by centuries of carefully orchestrated royal marriages. His skeletal deformities, fluid-filled skull, and hormonal deficiencies were not accidents. They were the inevitable outcome of a dynasty obsessed with bloodline purity. Modern science now views him as a stark warning. Biology cannot be ignored, and heredity carries consequences beyond human control. His life teaches that wealth, power, and divine right cannot override the immutable laws of genetics. The king's suffering, once considered a mystery or a curse, is now understood as the culmination of human error repeated over generations. A living, breathing case study of genetic collapse. Preserved in both history books and scientific literature, the king's tragic existence did more than shock the court. It reshaped the course of history. When he died without an heir, the centuries-old empire he was meant to perpetuate fractured, sparking wars, shifting alliances, and altering the balance of power across continents. The War of Succession erupted, a direct consequence of a body too fragile to fulfill its duty, leaving entire nations embroiled in conflict over a throne that should have been secured by bloodline. Politically, his life stands as a cautionary tale. No amount of wealth, influence, or divine sanction can compensate for the failure of the human body. Beyond the battles and treaties, his story serves as a human warning, a reminder of the consequences of extreme inbreeding and the obsession with purity. Portraits that once celebrated his lineage now tell a different story, one of suffering, fragility, and the ultimate futility of ignoring biological limits. Modern historians and geneticists alike look to his life as a case study in the intersection of power and biology, the devastating effects of repeated hereditary mistakes, and the fragility of even the most celebrated dynasties. His suffering was not in vain, for it provides lessons centuries later: the importance of genetic diversity, the limits of human control, and the cruel consequences of arrogance when nature is defied. Behind the crown, the scepter, and the gilded palace walls, there was a human being who endured unimaginable pain and humiliation. The king born with liquid bones and a skull full of water reminds us that history is not only shaped by battles and politics, but also by the invisible, unyielding laws of biology. Power may last for centuries, but the body, fragile, finite, and merciless, always holds the final authority.